a foreword that wasn't very necessary when I was looking over the myths and history and the foul creatures of this land. As is spoken about vaguely or in technical terms in history and myth, and is mentioned in the foul creatures, Archfiends were and are human. And as we learned in the foul creatures, humans, what makes them the highest being on this land is their ability to function while being the greatest at every one of the seven sins in comparison to every other creature. They are the proudest, the most envious, the greedy, the most angry, the most lustful, the most slothful, the most gluttonous, and two other things that we cannot talk about. Today we will be learning about the greedy archfiends, the ones who would give up anything to get another bit of what they want. I only say this now for the people who have not heard the previous chapters or do not wish to. The slime. Slime, the typical form of humans, fall into avarice. To fulfill a wish, one must make an appropriate offering. Even the most impoverished have one thing to offer: their bodies. Let us imagine a man seeking to satisfy his greed for gold. His flesh melts, leaving bones in a slimy soup, a clarified soup of body parts, with organs floating atop the viscous compound. The fulfillment of his wish begins as his vitals turn all to gold and jewels, but human greed knows no bounds. The bounty of one's body soon becomes insufficient. To further sate his cravings, he attempts to envelop the bodies of passerby. It is said that the different people become slimes for different reasons. Many slimes are said to be born of wanton lust or gluttony. Dear readers, beware the strength of your desire. The Pegasus. There was once a farm that harbored a terrible secret. Countless sets of waxen wings could be seen strewn all over. The master of the farm was said to possess mysterious powers, these wings the result of sinister experiments. Apparently, none but he could manipulate the waxen wings, but then one day he simply vanished. The result of this was that the farm lay abandoned. Some ventured there hoping to steal the wings, but no sooner did they touch them than the wax seared the flesh from their bones. One day a bedraggled and desperate man made his way to the farm. Despite his appearance, he had once been a mighty king's most trusted courtier, but at the same time he had burned with his very own fierce ambition. He plotted and schemed, dreaming of deposing the king and taking his place. When the king's son and heir died in a tragic incident, the ruler was inconsolable. His master distracted, the courtier seized his chance and set his plans in motion. One of his schemes involved the abandoned farm. Since all who dwelt nearby were terrified of this sinister farm, the courtier thought that by dealing with it once and for all, he could win the people's hearts. This one tragic mistake was to bring about all the misfortune that followed. The kingdom's troops rallied to the courtier's cry, but none who marched on the farm returned alive. The dark power of that enchanted wax had doubtless proved too much. Yet terrified of appearing weak, the courtier persisted in his plan. The tally of victims grew grimmer, and the courtier was held responsible for the tragedy. Coming under close scrutiny, his treacherous schemes unraveled. He knew this would mean death and so fled before he could be captured. The courtier traveled to the corners of the land, desperate to evade his pursuers. Finally, with the irony not lost on him, he was left with one last place to turn: the abandoned farm. He knew better than anyone the danger posed by that enchanted wax and the wings formed from it. But as soon as he laid eyes on the wings, his fear was all forgotten. He desired only to make them his own. With the power of flight, he would no longer have to fear those who hunted him. Yet he knew he was apt to lose his life the instant he touched them. As he pondered the path he should take, his pursuers drew closer. Knowing he was trapped, he steeled himself to take the wings. The king's forces combed the farm, certain their quarry was close. Then, just as the courtier reached his hand towards the pale wings, he let out a small cry. A sharp pain shot from the nape of his neck. It looked like he'd been bitten by an insect. Though the pain had been slight, his howl was enough to alert his pursuers to his presence. As he reached again for the wings, he felt a heavy blow strike him between the shoulder blades. As his consciousness grew dim, the courtier saw a strange glow. A chalice floated in midair, emitting a white light. It spoke to him. Irresistibly drawn to that voice, he obeyed its every word. The wings melted, the wax running over the body of the courtier as he lay prone. His wish had been granted, and he took flight. His pursuers gazed up agog. It was only then that he became aware of his transfiguration. He gazed down at his form and saw that it was no longer that of a human. A thick, pale substance oozed over his flesh, and he had sprouted enormous wings. When he finally saw his own face, he wondered if its insectoid shape had come from the fly that had bitten him before. Whatever he now was, it was neither man nor beast. With this pale fluid dripping from him, it looked as though he were fashioned from wax. No longer a creature of flesh and blood, but reborn as a lurid tallow. This was the price the courtier had paid. The king tried again and again to vanquish the foul creature, but to no avail. Some traces of the courtier still remained post-transformation. The desire to depose the king and take his place burns still now within the creature's breast. Believing itself the ruler of all, it surveys. This monstrosity looks down on the world with haughty contempt. To this day it soars through the kingdom's skies, ever hunting. The Wyvern. Once there lived an assassin. Following the commands of a prominent noble, he eliminated powerful adversaries under the cover of night. And gifted with exceptional hearing, his keen ears proved a boon to this work. He identified himself with the bat and felt a close affinity with its ability to float through the gloam. While working, he mimicked the ways of the bat, covering himself in bat black, listening attentively and moving with purpose. One day he undertook a mission seemingly no more difficult than any other. However, he soon found himself over a barrel. No sooner had he killed his victim than he was ambushed by unknown assailants. Death was all but assured. Suddenly he heard a whispering in his ear. He turned to see a fleeting vision of a chalice. Make me an offering of whatever is dear to you. Obeying the voice, he sacrificed his superb hearing. He had lost his ears, and instead bat wings grew in their place. Taking to the air, the assassin flew to safety. Once he was able to reflect, the realization dawned that whoever ambushed him knew he was coming. All became clear. Only his master could have orchestrated the attack. Through his unsavory deeds, the assassin knew a number of the noble's secrets. If such information was ever leaked, his master would lose everything, and so the assassin became a target himself. The next day, he returned to the noble as if nothing had happened. When asked about his wings, he replied, "Please spare me your concern." His master has no response. Thereafter, the man continued to carry out assassinations with unshakable purpose. At times, the noble's requests were extremely difficult, even bordering on the impossible. His master was trying to kill him, but he completed each mission regardless. Requiring new abilities, he offered up his flesh for further bat-like power. By developing his hind legs, he could cling to the ceiling to conceal himself. However, his human legs became terribly deformed. By turning his skin black, he could melt into the night, though the sun now caused him horrible pain. By emitting ultrasonic waves from his mouth, he could master his surroundings, but his capacity for speech was lost. Gradually, he became more bat than human being. He could have simply slain his master, yet he chose not to. True, the assassin's work was in no way honorable by ordinary standards, but the man had his own sense of honor. He would not kill anyone unless ordered to do so. He was not a simple murderer. Before long, the noble fell ill and passed away. No one could identify the cause of death, but the symptom resembled a fever borne by bats. The noble's death was not by any means something that the assassin had intended to cause. Though he may have undergone a bat-like transformation, he still saw himself as a noble practitioner of his art, even if somewhere in his heart he'd wished for his master's death. A rumor emerged about a monster flying off the manor's roof very soon after. The creature was neither bird nor human, but something hideous with features of a bat. Ouroboros. He was a man known for his wild and eccentric ideas. The inventions he produced were as fascinating as they were useless, Everyone agreed. The man was either a genius or a fool. One day he trained his unique eye on a simple chart. He envisioned wheels that turned without a horse to pull them, a vehicle that propelled itself. If such a thing could be fashioned, surely it would make the world a better place. A normal man would never have entertained such thoughts, yet the inventor was deadly serious. Prototype after prototype, he tinkered, but the results he sought stayed beyond his reach. Next, his eyes fell upon a water wheel, a fishing boat's sail. He had his answer. He needed only harness nature's power. And what greater source of power exists in nature than lightning? Surely a bolt, if harnessed, would yield more energy than the gentle flow of water or wind. He was certain of it. He departed for a land known for frequent thunderstorms, and there began his studies. Lightning seeks out metal, he soon discovered, and so he donned a suit of metal armor in hopes of summoning a bolt. Patiently he waited for the clouds to loose their arrow, and then it happened. Just as he thought, the white bolt traced a straight line across the sky to him. The man was as great a fool as he was a gifted thinker. Not surprisingly, he was terribly injured. Nearly killed, the stunned man saw a different white light in the air before him now. It was the glow of a strange chalice which spoke to him. Its proposal was strange even to the eccentric's ear, and yet he agreed. A change overtook him. It was a metamorphosis begun when lightning struck him. From his mouth poured thunderclouds. It was as if his very soul were escaping from his body. Closer still, it resembled a snake casting off its weathered skin. From the ominous cloud, the man's face emerged. Its dark and churning shape was now the home to his spirit. He had become a living nimbus lightning. He had become a living nimbus. Lightning was his to wield as he willed. Perhaps now, he thought, my dreams can be realized. No action was needed on the man's part. Simply hovering near the cart was enough to send energy surging through it. But the cart's wood cannot withstand the force and burst into splinters. He had need of a more resilient material. The man glanced back and saw his own discarded body. He stretched and pulled at it, bending it into a large hoop. For spokes, he wedged his limbs into his gaping mouth. And so it was his monstrous invention was complete. It was perfect, and in return the man had become a monster. The thought caused him little bother, a form to match his eccentric mind indeed. The man was both gifted and foolish. As such, he was far beyond the understanding of ordinary men. And so he travels the land still, together with his ever-spinning wheel. Griffin. This was once a wealthy nobleman who was in possession of huge tracts of land, collecting a multitude of taxes and tithes from his tenants. He had grown very wealthy indeed. He was particularly fond of one item he had received. It was a golden statuette depicting a monster, bird, and human frolicking together. The nobleman loved his statuette and would spend his every waking moment staring at it. Servants claimed that they had seen him talking to the statue, embracing it, and sometimes even licking and tasting it with his tongue. He was like a man possessed. One day, a bedraggled peasant asked for an audience with the nobleman. He had come to beg for the return of his work, as it transpired that he had crafted the nobleman's beloved statuette, but in fact he had never intended to give the statuette away. He claimed it was dangerous, that people had become slaves to it. He said that he desired it to be so, and that he'd paid a terrible price. The peasant rolled up his sleeves to reveal his skin. It was swollen and sore, but with no ordinary inflammation. Tears welled up in the peasant's eyes as he begged for his statuette to be returned. The nobleman took one look at the peasant and gave a snort of laughter. How can I return this if it was never yours to begin with? You own nothing. Everything in my land belongs to me. The nobleman kicked the peasant to the floor and stamped on his head. He would not relent until the peasant had agreed to give him everything he owned, every last coin. The event acted as a spur for the nobleman's violent tendencies. He became so desperate to assert his authority in any way he could, and imposed even heavier taxes on his tenants. His love for treasure grew and grew, but it was no longer enough to merely look. He demanded that platters of gold and silver coin were served at mealtimes, forcing himself to swallow them. Eventually growing tired of suffering in silence, The peasants rose up against the noblemen, looking to unleash their years of pent up rage. They advanced on the castle. The noblemen's staff, aware that the time for civil interaction had long passed, fled as soon as they saw the mob approach. The peasants were desperate to capture the nobleman, but could not find him anywhere inside the castle. It was then that one of their number heard a soft voice coming from inside the castle's treasure room. What the peasants saw was nothing short of a monster who had sold his soul for treasure. The nobleman was no longer human in appearance. His body all turned to treasure. The nobleman had become that which he so desired. It seemed his favorite gold statuette had taken possession of him. Perhaps that was what he had wanted all along. The monstrous nobleman turned on his peasants, killing them all. Humanity had abandoned him. He thought about nothing but maintaining and adding to his hoard of treasure. Apparently, this is still the case. One must be careful upon acquiring treasure, for this selfish beast will think nothing of using its sharp claws to tear it from your grasp. Leprechauns. There once lived a set of triplets, born to a renowned cobbler. The shoes their father made were comfortable beyond compare and favored by many in the nobility. For his part, the cobbler intended to pass along his knowledge and his business with it. Each of the triplets felt they were the worthiest successor, and they improved by leaps and bounds through constant competition. Most fervent of all was the youngest of three. Given equal skill, convention suggested that it would be the eldest that would inherit, unless he could surpass them clearly, incontrovertibly, he knew he stood no chance. In the course of his efforts, he concluded that it was the materials that decided a shoe's quality. He experimented with leathers made from every manner of beast imaginable. These experimentations brought to light a certain pattern. The more intelligent the animal, the more supple and lustrous its hide once tanned. This discovery proved of vital help in securing the best leathers, and the younger son rejoiced. Yet doubt still lingered. Surely there must be some way to produce even finer shoes. Amid the feverish traffic of thoughts through his mind, a single mad idea emerged. There does exist a more intelligent animal, and in great numbers, quite close by, humans. What's more, he could immediately think of two people that he wouldn't mind disposing of in order to get a hold of their leather. But he lacked the courage to take a life himself. Agonizing over this grim dilemma, he looked up to see a curious sight. A floating chalice, white as sun-bleached bone. He heard its voice. You need but pay the price, and all you desire is yours. The young man shouted his reply. Take the flesh of my two brothers, said he, and craft from them a shoe fit to satisfy my father. But the bond shared by sibling born on the same day is a curious thing. They tend to think alike, and so it was that all three triplets made the same wish on the same day at the very same time. 3 shoes were made that day. Their torsos were fashioned in the shape of footwear, with their heads and limbs protruding awkwardly. The living shoes raced back to their family home and began to quarrel and curse one another fiercely. Their father, watching on, was struck with a profound sadness. It takes love to be a master cobbler. You will never craft a good shoe if you lack the empathy to dedicate yourself fully to the wearer's comfort. You fools, he thundered. Did you never think to work together? I had always planned to pass my trade on to all 3 of you. Instead, all 3 were disowned and booted from their ancestral home. What would they do now, they wondered? How would they live, monstrous as they had become? They decided their only hope was to heed their father's word and band together. Together they would perfect the art of shoemaking and show their father up. First, of course, they would need good leather. Even still, the brothers' bond remained strong as they stalked the land, peeling the skin from the choicest of specimens. Though they knew the finest leather came from that most intelligent of animals, it seems that in their hurry to put their father in his place, they had completely ignored his real lesson. The mastery of their craft would only come through empathy. Chimera. The man's dream was to gain glory and renown as a warrior. With his firm determination and stoicism, he had never given in to any temptation. With his single-minded dedication to self-improvement, he had already gained a reputation. Much was expected of his future, and he was on the verge of truly making his mark on history. However, the man's body was broken in a tragic accident, and he was no longer able to fight. He had suffered a grave injury to his leg, and it had left him lame. He laid down his sword, though it was true that he did this with some regret. He could accept that it was because of his injury that he must do so. Most of all, his dream had not yet died. For the man had a son, and it was for the sake of his son that the man could come to terms with sheathing his sword for good. Whenever he saw his son, he would always think, "That's my boy. That's my flesh and blood." The son's physical bearing and development said it all. He had the talents to become a warrior. The man decided to entrust his dreams to his son, who still had a bright future ahead of him. The son understood his father's feelings. He was acutely aware of his father's frustrations. It was his fault that his father had been injured. His father had thrown himself under the wheels of a carriage to save him from being run over. The son felt as though a great thorn had been driven into his heart with his father's injury. Trying to dig out this thorn, the son decided he must see out his father's dream, no matter the price. The son was still too young to know what this feeling was. It was the wish to atone. Though still a child, he had a deep sympathy for his father. He was a child who understood pain. Normally such empathy would be praised, but for a warrior it could be his downfall. He was so kind he couldn't even kill a fly. How could someone who would pity even an insect ever become a warrior? Humanity is the first thing a soldier should discard on the battlefield. The boy's father decided that in order to train his son, he must be cruel in order to be kind. He deliberately treated him strictly. He gave up on acting as a father to become the boy's master in the arts of combat instead. He gave his son a trial to give him the mental preparation to take a life. He brought out one of the goats that they kept and ordered his son to kill it. The son didn't want to, but his father shouted at him mercilessly, "You're not coming back in until you kill that goat." Going along with his father's demands, the son killed a living creature for the first time in his life. He snapped the goat's neck. He could never forget the sound of bone breaking or the goat's final cry. Horrified, he threw up repeatedly. Feeling somewhat pleased, the father welcomed his son back into the house. Then, using a horn from the dead goat, he crafted a spear. The son didn't want it. It was only a reminder of the moment he killed the goat. That was the father's purpose. He wanted his son to get used to the stench of death. He wanted it to be familiar to the boy. The next thing his father prepared was a snake. Unlike the gentle goat, it was venomous. The boy would suffer greatly if he were bitten. But the father would not relent. He would not allow his son back into the house until he had killed the snake. The boy stamped the snake's head in. The vile sensation beneath his foot crawled up his body. The boy knew what he had done even without lifting his foot. He felt how the contents of the snake's head were dashed across the ground, and how it had lost its shape. He threw up again, just as he did when he killed the goat. The boy brought home the remains of the snake, and his father used them to make a shield. Whenever the boy looked at the shield, he remembered the sensation of death he had felt underfoot. His father was pleased with his son's progress. He supposed that he would now have a more concrete idea of death. He decided to give his son an even greater trial. He went so far as to borrow money and have a wild beast brought in from a foreign land, a lion. The boy trembled at the lion's roar. Of course, the boy feared the sharp teeth and the claws of the lion, but there was something else that struck him, a terror even more chilling. The thing that terrified him the most was not the lion, but the mind of his father, the mentality that would subject him to such danger. Still, the boy was prepared for this. Even if his father had lost his mind, it was the boy's fault for causing his father's injury and ruining his life. Perhaps he had destroyed his father's soul along with his. The boy scraped together all of his courage. He would do anything for his father. The way he took up the sword for the sake of his fellow man proved that he had never been a born warrior. Everything about the boy's attitude spoke of a consideration for others. Such empathy was a double-edged sword for a warrior. The act of killing another person would wound his own delicate heart in turn. Yet still the boy fought the beast, thinking only of pleasing his father. Through this vicious battle to the death, he triumphed. The boy stood dumbstruck, covered in blood, holding the head of the lion. His father was convinced the boy would do well. Pleased, the father took the body of the lion and used it to craft armor for his son. He decided it was time at last for the final trial, actual combat. He would test whether his son was ready to take the final step over the line. It's time you learn to kill a man, the father said with a weak grin. You can start by killing me. The boy still speechless. The father continued. Quitting the battlefield robbed him of his reason to live, he said. The battle would nourish his son, who would carry on his dream, he said. He told his son that this was his life's ambition. The boy refused, saying that he absolutely could not do it. He threw his weapon to the ground, and as he did so, his father struck him hard. Through bitter tears, the boy cried out that he could not do it, but his father would not listen. The boy's father did whatever he could to make his son pick up his weapon, but the boy's hand remained limp. Until the very end, he had no mercy. He saw his son as a replacement for himself. At some point, he had to come to no longer distinguish between himself and his son, and his son's life had become a mere extension of his dream. He forced his son to hold the weapon by stitching it to his hand, bellowing at the sobbing boy. You must think of yourself as a weapon. You are a tool for killing. That's all you are. As he shouted this, tears streamed down the man's own cheek. The man continued to scream at the boy. A warrior has no need for sympathy. I was a warrior once. I should know. If it weren't for sympathy, then maybe I wouldn't have saved your sorry life that day. He whispered, if only I could have shed my kindness as a father, then I could have lived on as a warrior. The boy was stunned by his father's confession. He had an inkling, of course. He suspected his father had regretted saving his life. The boy's father screamed again, screamed for the boy to kill him. The compassion that made him shield his son had dashed his dreams of becoming a great warrior. He didn't want his son to fall into the same rut. No matter how the boy resisted, he could not overcome his father's determination. Even at this point, his father was judging him to see if he would be a warrior fit to carry on his dream. It was all too bitter that having come this far for his father's sake, the boy could now only pick up his torch by killing him. At that moment, a strange apparition appeared before the boy. He looked up and saw a white chalice floating in the air before him. It spoke directly into his mind. I can grant that wish if you can make the sacrifice. The boy screamed out in his mind, I want to give my father what he wants. I want to be the one to carry on his dream, even if it means I become a heartless murderer, even if it means murdering my father, just as he wishes me to. The son paid with his emotions. He threw away his feelings for his father, which till that point has filled his thoughts. Ironically, it was just what his father wanted. A heartless warrior, a simple tool for battle. Just as a sword or a spear has no heart, a tool whose only function is to kill. A warrior who has lost all emotion sees everything as an enemy. Weapons and armor cannot distinguish between friends and foe. The son did not hesitate. Perhaps he didn't even recognize the man as his father anymore. He made quick work of him. In the end, a small twinge of pain shot through the son's chest, but he no longer knew what it was. Perhaps with that, the son had become the warrior his father had wanted. And yet perhaps the result was more than what the father had wished for. Having lost his humanity utterly, the son could not even remember his father. Was it possible the man felt regret at never being called father again? Had he truly realized the tragedy of losing the bond between father and son? There was no way for the father to answer the question. He lay dead, killed by his son. All that remains now is the instrument of war created together by father and son. Take these words and learn.